Well, it did now because I just hit it. So
Good. All right, let's go ahead and get this thing started.
you're on.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jason Zacher, Senior Vice President of Business Advocacy here at the Greenville Chamber. Thank you for joining us for the first in our Community Matters virtual series. Before we begin, please know the Greenville Chamber understands what a difficult time this is, especially for the business community, and we stand ready to support you. Our service model might be looking a little different these days, but our team is dedicated to bringing you innovative business solutions, just as we have for 131 years. This virtual series is one of those solutions. Over the coming weeks, we'll connect you with local leaders and experts to discuss the issues and answer the questions you have that are top of mind at the moment. So please tune in Tuesdays and Thursdays at 10 a.m. You can learn more and register at greenvillechamber.org. So let's take care of a couple housekeeping things real quick too. All attendees should be on mute right now. And you can submit questions through the chat feature. I think we've got a lot of things, and a lot of you submitted questions ahead of time, so we've already sent those to the panelists, and hopefully we'll get those answers. And if we don't have time to answer all the questions, you can email me at jzacher@greenvillechamber.org, and I put my email in the group chat. Introduce our featured speakers here real quick. Nick Myers serves as Senator Graham's Senior Counsel for Healthcare and Economic Policy. Nick is based in the Washington office and has been on Senator's staff for more than 5 years. Previously, he worked in the United States House and for a commercial real estate private equity firm. Charles Cogar is Legislative Director for Senator Tim Scott. He's been with the Senator since 2013. He wants to say, unfortunately, he's originally from Colorado, but we won't hold that against him today. So we appreciate both of y'all being, and thank you for both being here today.
Thank you, Jason.
So Nick and Charles, I don't know which one of you wants to start first, but who has a 30,000-foot level of what exactly is in the CARES Act?
I think I'll go first. That's okay.
Yes, go ahead, Charles.
The bill, the CARES Act that was signed into law last week, is the third phase of the congressional response to the coronavirus crisis. Briefly, phase one was passed March 6th. That one is $8 billion worth in funding, mostly to the federal response agencies, CDC, Public Health, National Institutes of Health, and so forth. That was a phase one bill. Phase two bill followed a couple weeks later, March 18th. That one was, I lost my number. Yeah, that one was about a $90 billion bill. That was one provided for a lot of testing. That one had the new leave mandates, emergency leave, federal leave, small business leaves, and so forth. That had increased Medicare, federal cost sharing for the states, had unemployment administration grants to the states. That was one, again, that passed on the 18th. That was phase two. As soon as that one, and that one I should say was written mostly by the House of Representatives, and the Senate decided pretty much to take that up and pass it without any changes. Once that passed, the Senate then turned to phase three, which was the CARES Act. That one passed finally, passed the Senate on March 25th. It was signed into law by the President on Friday. That's $2 trillion bill. Nick's going to go into what is essentially in that bill, but that was then the Senate response. As you can tell, the price of the bills keeps escalating as the crisis keeps expanding its reach on the economy and the country. This one was drafted in the Senate. It was drafted with cooperation, obviously, from the administration, and in the end, changes were made by the Democratic minority in the Senate as well. So it passed bipartisan, unanimous, 96-0. The only senators who didn't vote for it were the senators who were quarantined due to exposure to the virus. So it doesn't happen often in the Senate. We're glad it happened this time. And they will, you may see a talk about a phase four. At this point, phase four is just exists as people's wish lists. There is nothing that's being done. We are seeing the implementation problems that come out of phase three. We can see what further develops in the virus. The Senate and the House are in recess until April 20th. So when they come back, there are obviously 3 more weeks of the impacts of this virus on the country. So we'll see what is necessary. We'll see what holes have developed in the phase three strategy. We'll see what sort of implementation problems have occurred. And that's what will be in phase four. So when people talk about phase four, I can assure you we don't have it yet. We don't know what's in it. We're still talking about what's necessary. I've always heard my boss refer 4 or 5 times over the weekend that, well, we'll look at that for phase four, because something was missed in phase 3, there's not a lot we can do right now. We just have to look at the next legislation. And before I pass to Nick, I also want to point out, I know it seems like it's been forever, but phase 3 became law at about 5 o'clock on Friday, and it's still Tuesday. So they are moving lightning fast, especially for the federal government, but the implementation and the regulations and how this is going to happen is still not known in a lot of cases. So we can answer everything we have, but this is a bill that became law less than a week ago. So obviously it takes some time to get where we need to be on all the answers for everyone.
Great.
Great. That was a great overview, Charles. Thanks so much. This is Nick Myers from Senator Graham's office. I'm going to give a brief overview specifically of phase 3 that Charles mentioned, the CARES Act. The CARES Act, as Charles mentioned, was just passed on Friday. And the purpose of the bill is to try to provide assistance down to state and locals, as well as businesses, nonprofits, as quickly and as efficiently as possible. There's 4 kind of main ways we're trying to get money out to everybody. One is through the so-called direct payments. The one you hear mostly about are the checks of $1,200 or $2,400 for a married couple. This is going to be for everybody. Everyone's going to receive a full payment up to $75,000 of income for an individual, $150,000 for a married couple. Those get means tested up to $200,000 for a married couple and $100,000, $99,000 to be exact, for a single individual. So with each kind of corresponding increase of income that someone receives above $75,000 to $99,000, then their check will be reduced from $1,200 all the way down, ultimately to $0. So we're trying to get that money down. That's going to be helpful, I think, indirectly to businesses, and that regardless of what business you're in, if you do have some interactions with consumers, this will help, particularly if you're in like a takeout business, if you are in the real estate business and someone has a rent payment coming up, if you're in the financial industry and there's payments that folks are going to have to satisfy. That is something we think will be helpful there. The other big part of these direct payments, you may have heard, and actually Senator Scott and Senator Graham were really involved in this, is the idea of increasing not only the eligibility, but the amounts of unemployment assistance down to everybody. What this bill does is as some of you may be aware, for unemployment in South Carolina, the highest that someone can claim is $362 per week. What this bill does is we have created another category called Emergency Pandemic Assistance Unemployment, which would run for 16 weeks and would increase everyone's unemployment by $600 per week. So that's not per month, that's per week. So it's quite generous in that someone will be getting $2,400 to $3,000 added on per month in terms of unemployment. That's something recognizing that, again, depending on the industry, whole industries have had to furlough or put people on unemployment through no one's fault but the virus, and that is there. Now, one provision about this that Senator Graham and Senator Scott were directly involved in is the way the bill was drafted. It effectively can have the perverse situation where someone could be making more in unemployment than they were before their job. Someone, if they're getting the 362 plus the 600, they're now effectively making $23.15 an hour not to work. So our bosses were very concerned about that. What they were trying to do through an amendment, it was the only amendment voted on in the CARES Act, they worked on an amendment that would give up to an unemployment amount to make somebody whole, but not to exceed that. What we're worried about here is particularly with certain businesses that if someone is going to have unemployment, perhaps maybe double their normal income for 4 months, it can be very difficult in some of your industries to try to attract some of those folks back to work. It's hard to get an economy going where a swath of the workforce, we may be upwards of, depending on the projection, over 20% unemployment in the coming months. To try to get that slack of the economy back into the labor force working is going to be challenging, and we believe this certainly is yet another barrier to that. Our amendment was voted 48 to 48. We weren't successful in passing, but this is something that, to the extent it's revisited in a phase 4, we're certainly going to be front and center with again. Another way that money's coming down to the states is through medical spending. There is significant resources being sent down to our hospitals, to our community health centers, for veterans care, FEMA. There's also money going directly to the strategic national stockpile. For some of you that may be involved directly in healthcare, we have heard from providers of all sizes about worries they have, either immediate shortages of anything from a mask or gowns or swabs. And so the point of this is so that we're not going to have these shortages. It was nice to see President Trump yesterday with folks in the manufacturing industry switching their businesses over to deal with healthcare. GM, as we know, is going to be doing that with ventilators. So it really is kind of all hands on deck on that. That portion of the bill nationally was just shy of 340 billion. However, 274 billion roughly will be going down to the states and locals. So the idea is to get the money out of Washington. There's also, the Treasury now has a economic assistance mechanism similar to what they had during the recession of 2008. Back then, the program was called TARP, where back then the Federal Reserve and the Treasury was able directly to lend assistance to the financial industry at that time. Under this scenario, we are expecting that particularly the passenger airlines, cargo folks, as well as some businesses that are in national security, particularly are going to be utilizing those resources. Those are going to be structured as loans, so there's no grants to industries on the large scale from the federal government around this time. There are restrictions on that. There will be full transparency, just like there was in 2008 with the TARP program. And so that's going to be another tool that Secretary Mnuchin and everybody over at Treasury is going to have to try to make sure that we're able to maintain ongoing operations, particularly in those sectors. We also have a extensive fund going down to the states. It's 150 billion total going down to the states, territories, as well as tribal governments. Each state is going to get at least 1.25 billion. And then it's going to be a portion based on population. So we haven't seen a final tally on what will be coming down to the state for general assistance. There is a provision there, although I don't think it is going to incorporate any of our counties. A couple of our counties might now be just over 500,000, but there's a provision for cities and municipalities with at least 500,000 in population. They could apply directly to the Treasury themselves. I know a couple of our counties are kind of right on the bubble, but for most cases, most of the funds are going to be received by the governor, and every territory, or every county, I should say, a municipality within the state can coordinate with the governor's office for assistance. The last program, which I'll let Senator Charles go into because Senator Scott was so instrumental in writing this provision. It's a great program. It's the SBA provision. I'm sure most of you are very interested in this, called the Paycheck Protection Program. And Charles, I'll let you do a little summary on that.
Charles, you're still muted. I can't unmute you at the moment.
You missed my words. They were all genius level, but I'll try again.
Fantastic.
The program is the Small Business Paycheck Protection Program. It's essentially, and any flaws you find in it are because the goal is to keep small business payroll in operation. What it does is it allows businesses can receive small business 7A loans to pay 8 weeks of their payroll costs, which includes their benefits. The funds can also be used to pay interest on mortgages, rents, utilities, and so forth. What you can do is apply for 250% of your monthly payroll, so 2.5 times your monthly payroll. And of that amount, it's supposed to be 2 months payroll, and then the other 50% is for other expenses. You apply for the loans. The loan application just got released about half an hour ago. You do it through your local lender. If you have a relationship with a lender, most major banks, a lot of community banks are small business 7A lenders. There's also increased eligibility to be a lender, so there'll be more banks jumping on. You apply through your lender, you can get this loan. If you use it for payroll, there are certain restrictions on keeping people employed. If you use it for payroll, then that loan will be forgiven. So basically it turns from a loan into a grant for you to provide 2 months worth of payroll. And that's essentially the heart of it.
Good summary.
Charles, how I know that we're still waiting on some final rules and everything on this, and then I think what just came out from Treasury should have some of that, but how quickly can businesses expect getting some of this money if they apply?
There is a bridge loan that they're small disaster bridge loans of up to $10,000 that they say they expect to get out within 3 to 5 days while the rest of the loan is processed, but it should be, it's weeks is what they're hoping.
Okay.
Short weeks.
How do you determine if you're eligible for these loans?
Small businesses under 500 employees who are affected by coronavirus. It's pretty broad eligibility, and we increase the eligibility for the first time ever. Nonprofits, churches, and so forth can apply for these loans. Independent contractors can apply for these loans.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, the read details, small business, I mean, I don't want to keep telling people don't look at us, but the information is flooding out. Lenders have the information, Small Business Administration has the information, and Treasury is now putting out information as well, with a lot more detailed information than we can give to you guys today.
Yeah, so
it's essentially for small businesses under 500 employees.
Okay. And you one of the big things that changed in this was the sole proprietor, self-employed, and 1099 employees. You know, do you have any idea? I mean, obviously, again, the rules are still coming out, but how would they apply for those, or how, what do they have to show?
The guidance that just came out said the small business for employers will be eligible on this Friday, April 3rd, and then next Friday is when the independent contractors can begin applying as well, using the special Paycheck Protection Loan application that is now available.
Okay. What are the rules on trying to get these forgiven later? What do businesses have to do? What are some of the requirements that you all haven't put in the law?
The funds will be fully forgiven when they're used for payroll costs, interest on mortgages, rents, and utilities. So at that time when the loan's due in the year, any loan that you can show that you used, any parts of the loan that you used for that will be forgiven. The rest of it will be a loan. The part used for payroll will be a grant.
Okay. If you do, and you have to keep your employees on, I understand. So
yes.
If you do have to have an employee furlough or cut or something like that, then how does it convert, and what is it going to convert to later? Do you know the terms of the loan roughly?
If the employee is no longer employed, then that part of the loan would remain a loan. But
Okay.
For the employees who stay employed, you kept them on employment through the loan, then that part would be the grant.
Okay. Do you all?
Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Can either one of you also speak to the difference between the disaster loans and the Paycheck Protection loans? Because that's a question we've been getting a lot.
The disaster loans were set up to be a bridge while the Paycheck Protection loan was processed.
Okay.
$10,000 would be the disaster loan is the ceiling on that, whereas the Paycheck Protection loan is a $1 million cap.
Okay.
Nick, did you have anything else on that one?
No, I think that was a good summary. One point I would add is to encourage folks to talk to their financial partners in this. So if you work with a credit union, bank, other financial institution, those folks are going to be up and running this week to try to help streamline that process. Treasury and SBA are trying to also expand the pool of already listed SBA approved financial institutions. And for folks on the call who are in those industries, thank you so much for working so quickly with the federal government to try to get these funds out to businesses who need them.
If one other question I think that I received a little bit is, what are the options available in the bill for companies that have more than 500 employees? If they don't qualify for the SBA loans, what kind of payroll tax deferrals or other things like that are in the law?
Sure. So there's several business provisions as well, because that is a good question. That, well, what if your business doesn't, is in fact larger than that? You still have challenges during this time. There's one exception that we should point out for the $500 rule. If your business has an NAICS code of 72, if you're in the accommodation or food business as well with that code, if you have if you have more than 500 employees in the aggregate, but a cap of 500 employees per location, the normal SBA affiliate rules are waived in this instance. So if you're in particularly a franchise business or something else that involves multiple locations like that, we have knocked down those barriers, recognizing that where traditionally the SBA would have considered that one large entity, here we're trying to consider that five small businesses separately. Another point I should bring out too is that the SBA does define some industries as still being a small business, even though they exceed 500 employees. Those policies are still in place. So if your industry normally works with SBA, even though you have more than 500 employees at a location, that potentially could still be able to access the loans there, depending on the industry that you're in. SBA also has some details on their website about, for each industry, what's considered a small business. For folks that are above the 500, you are able to defer your payroll taxes on the employer side through the end of the year. You have 2 years in which to pay that back. Hopefully that the expectation that half of it being done in 2021, the other half in 2022. It's also possible for businesses to apply for a refundable payroll tax credit for 50% of wages that the businesses pay to employees up to $10,000 per employee. So we definitely encourage folks to look into that option as well. There is somewhat of a qualifier on that. If you are in a business with over 100 employees or over, you'll receive the credit only for employees that are not providing service due to the virus. So depending on your industry, God forbid if one of your employees either has COVID-19 or has a family member there, there's going to be a different qualification than if you're a smaller business. If you're just effectively having trouble altogether, you're going to have a little bit more flexibility with the employee retention credit, but that's still a very attractive provision. Another thing we put in there is the modification of the net operating losses for businesses. So while many businesses will have trouble in 2020, if you happen to have had an accounting loss in 2018 or 2019, we did provide some provisions that you would be able to use a carryback loss on that for up to 5 years. So I would encourage everyone to speak with their accountants to see if there's some modifications with that provision that can be more attractive. Also, for folks that particularly are in the restaurant industry, hospitality, or other businesses that utilize what's referred to as the qualified improvement depreciation provision. This was a provision that during tax reform was a drafting error. Excuse me. Unfortunately, we had drafted the bill where all kinds of equipment for businesses like stoves and other things were going to have to be depreciated over 39 years, which, as we know, is well past the useful life on those items. That has been restored to immediate depreciation. So I would encourage businesses to look at their inventories and property, plant, equipment, and then also speak with their accountants to take advantage of the tax treatments on that.
I want to open it up for some questions to the audience, folks. You can go to the chat feature and ask your questions. I have a few others from some other folks who emailed them ahead of time. One question I don't know if you all can answer is, are employer contributions to an employee's 401k considered a benefit under the Act?
Yes.
Answer. Yes?
payroll benefit.
Okay, excellent. The other question we had is if you applied for the disaster, does that impact your eligibility for the other, or how does that work? The U.S. Chamber said over the weekend on a call I was on saying that you might be able to roll one into the other. How does that? Is there guidance on that yet?
Yeah, the disaster loan would be subtracted from the Paycheck Protection loan.
Okay.
There are provisions to keep you from double dipping on the payroll retention credit and the payroll protection loans, but the disaster loans are designed to be a bridge into the Paycheck Protection loans. Sorry, the $10,000 grants, those would apply towards the payroll protection.
Okay.
Nick, you can cut in anytime here if I'm wrong.
No, you're doing a great job. No, you're explaining the program very well. Great job.
All right, I've got a few more questions that have come in here. Someone wants you all to try to expand on any opportunities for nonprofits via the furloughs and layoffs. So what is there anything else in there for nonprofits other than eligibility for these loans?
I can tell you one thing Senator Scott also fought for, and was the remarkable kindness of Chairman Rubio and others, was able to get included very well, is there's increased charitable deductions in the bill, including for the first time a $300 above the line charitable deduction, and then also increase the charitable deduction caps for nonprofits. So hopefully they can get more resources through that. There's the increased eligibility for the small business loans. And then for the first time ever, church employees are also eligible to apply for unemployment insurance for this year. Most churches do not pay into state unemployment insurance, and so therefore not eligible for it. Under this bill, they are now eligible for unemployment insurance for nonprofits, churches.
Okay. I think the question, the nonprofit question was just restated a little more clearly, I think, so I can understand it. For nonprofits who do not customarily pay unemployment tax, if they're faced with furloughs or layoffs, how can they access these benefits? Can their employees still all this?
Yeah. There's funding in there for states to pay unemployment insurance. So they will be doing it the same way as everyone does through your state unemployment insurance agency. We've been hearing that the South Carolina state website is crashing. I think that's probably shown that we went from a 1.5%, 2% unemployment rate to 6 or 7 or more. So yeah, it's not in a good shape, but that is where we have to go, unfortunately. So
one question that's a little bit of a turn on this, and I've heard this a few times, is independent contractors are eligible for some of these loans, but can businesses include independent contractors on their request?
No, independent contractors will have to apply for their own loan, their own small business loan.
Okay.
Again, Nick, jump in anytime here.
No, that's well, no, with the SBA program, and no, I mean, Charles has explained it very well. The purpose of this was to give independent contractors greater flexibility than they've ever had before. So they themselves can take advantage of the Paycheck Protection Program. So if there's anyone on the call who works in that format, encourage you to speak with your financial partner about applying for a loan. Also, there's the option that if you're affected by COVID-19, which most businesses absolutely, because of the economic harm this is doing, you can also directly, for the first time, apply for unemployment assistance. The definition of folks who are able to apply for unemployment was broadened in this bill to include not only independent contractors, but also the gig workers as well.
We have one very specific question that I'll go ahead. I was speaking with this person about earlier today. This one group is a special purpose district, which we have a lot of these in South Carolina. They're independent government entities or quasi-government entities in many ways that have taxing authority but may not have operations funded out of taxes. Is there any eligibility for them, or how would you suggest they help get that answer?
So the issue is, for eligibility in the program, you can be a for-profit business or a 501c3 organization. You can be a 501c19 veterans organization, or you can be organized as a tribal organization, which we don't have many of those in South Carolina. It really comes down to how your business is organized. So like a union, some other, unfortunately, 501c6s are not eligible for the program directly here. However, their employees, to the extent that they've been furloughed, can apply directly for unemployment assistance.
Okay. Someone, I think we mentioned this earlier, but it's actually, I think, pretty important. Charles, you mentioned, what was the direction now on when companies can start applying for these loans?
Friday.
Okay. And you said
the application is out now, so they would want to start doing the paperwork. But the Friday is when businesses apply. Next Friday is when independent contractors will be applying.
Okay. Are there any other questions for anybody, or anything else you all want to add that we have not covered yet? I'm waiting to see if I get any more questions pop in the chat here. Y'all, as in the chat is my email. So for everyone on the call, if you have any more questions, get them to me. I can get them to Charles or Nick or whoever else might be able to answer them for you. We're happy to do that. I've been doing it a lot in the past week or so, is trying to answer anything that comes across. But Charles, Nick, is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
I'd just like to add just a general thank you for everybody for participating on this call. These are really extraordinary times for our country. No one has ever seen something like this that is affecting everything and is global in nature. I think as Senator Scott and Senator Graham have talked about that, it's one thing to have had the challenges of 9/11 and then the challenges later with the financial crisis in 2008. So to have them all in kind of one event here is truly extraordinary. I want to emphasize that everybody, it was Senator Graham's team and Senator Scott and our entire delegation are here to help. Please let us know about trouble you're experiencing. It helps us when we try to revisit a potential phase 4 here. What are some things maybe we could do to try to correct some things that maybe weren't contemplated in phase 3? And we're happy to partner with Jason, everybody at the Greenville Chamber to answer any subsequent questions.
Yeah.
And thank you to the Chamber. As I mentioned, this is an extraordinarily complicated, very expensive bill that was written quickly and is written to react to things that are still developing. So it is a lot of moving parts and a lot of information we're trying to get out there, and calls like this and the efforts of the Chamber help us get that information to people who need it. And so we thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Yeah. And I want to thank real quick, not only Nick, you and Charles, but I also would like to thank Danielle Gibbs and Angie Omer, who are the local. Angie's with Lindsey Graham's office locally. Danielle is with Senator Scott's office here in Greenville. A lot of you all on the call probably know them. They have been a wonderful resource in helping get information to us, and I'm sure that they will be more than happy to help anyone that tries to get them a call. I know they're on the call, and they're probably, I'm now calling them out, but I wanted to thank them very much for everything they've done for us over the last week. So Charles, Nick, thank you so much. To everyone on the call, the recording will be shared. We will post this later. So that way you all can, you can share this with other folks, and we will be sharing it around as much as possible. Don't forget, this is going to be part of an ongoing series, and this is just the first one of our calls. So on Thursday at 10 a.m., we're going to have United Way CEO Megan Barb, and she's going to share a community update. You can learn more about that and register at greenvillechamber.org. And next Tuesday, Mayor White and Chairman Kervin will be on a call to discuss local government response and what's going on really locally with what the city and the county are doing. So those are our next 2 calls. We're looking forward to having both of them. And but everyone else, thank you all so much for being on the call, and we look forward to talking to you all again soon. Thank you for joining us.
I'm employed by Senator Scott, but I work for Danielle.
We all work for Danielle, don't worry.